All right, so welcome. I'm glad you guys could be here. Got a lot to talk about, so I'm just going to jump right into it. The scripture that I'm talking about is
We're all here.
Yes.
Matthew 13, 18 through 23. Some of you have probably heard this before. This is Jesus' response to his parable of the sower. So this is him kind of explaining what each of the seeds represent. So, hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. So in the process of breaking down what we just heard, I first want to start by having us identify who is the sower in this parable and who are the seeds. If you look back in the scripture, if you look at multiple verses, they say whoever is the one who is hearing the word. So those are the seeds who have landed, and they're the ones hearing the word. So we are the seeds in this parable. The sower, actually, there was MacArthur. He said that the sower is never actually identified with the parable, but we can assume from a later verse that it was Jesus. So in his time, when he was actually speaking the parable, he was speaking of the parable was representing his ministry and how how everyone has heard the word, but not anyone is really responding to it how he wanted them to. And so Jesus is the sower, we are the seeds. So now going into all of the seeds, first there are the seeds that fall on the path and that get snatched up by the birds. These are the people who hear the word but don't understand it, and they don't try to go deeper. They hear it, but they just ignore it, and they don't acknowledge it as something that can impact them and something that can change their life. And the birds in the parable are representing Satan, the enemy. And if we are just simply ignoring what God has for us, if we are just putting aside anything that he's trying to do in us, that makes it that much easier for Satan to come into our lives and take us away from what God is trying to do. Keener actually put it a great way of saying, simply hearing the gospel does not guarantee understanding or embracing it. So just because you go to church on a Sunday morning, or you're part of something on a Sunday night or a Wednesday or whatever you're part of, just because you hear someone talk about God doesn't mean you're going to understand it, and doesn't mean that you're going to truly embrace it and you're going to take it. Going on to the next one, the seeds that fall on the rocky ground, that immediately they sprout up, but then they wither and they die. These are the seeds that they're excited. They're excited about God. They're excited about what he's doing in their life, and they start growing and they start getting passionate and they start doing the will of God, and they start praying and they start doing what they're supposed to be doing. But then when things start getting a little difficult and they start getting persecuted in their job or in their school or even in their church, and something happens where they're not necessarily fully devoted to God now, then they slowly wither and they die away. So how many times has that happened to us, where we get so into God and we get the Jesus high and we get so passionate about it and we are excited because we're praying with God and we're growing closer to him, but then the sooner that things get hard for us and that there are things on the line, that we begin to realize that our faith comes with a cost, and sometimes what happens to our faith at that point. Going on to the third seed, the ones that grow in the thorns and then they not immediately, but they grow in thorns and then they get choked out. These are the thorns, these are the seeds that represent the people who hear the word and they believe in God and they love everything that's going on, but then they fall back in temptation. They fall back into the desires of the world and what the world talks about, and they fall back into that and whatever is messing with their life. And then it turns out that their roots weren't with God at all. Their roots were in their temptations. Their roots were there. They didn't truly believe that God would be able to provide for them, that they could take care of them. They knew that they had to provide for themselves. And that's what they believed. And it's because of that that when they grew up, they got choked out by the thorns. And last, there are the seeds that are landing in the good soil. They're the people who hear the word and they understand it. And they don't ignore it. They don't give up on it because they don't understand it or because they're being judged or persecuted because of the people around them. And they're not giving in to the temptations around them. They are firmly rooted and planted in what God has promised them. And then another commentator, Gibbs, he says that it's not known what the amount of fruit produced. So at the end there, how it talks about 100-fold and 60 and 30, that's not necessarily known to us what that means, but it doesn't necessarily hold a significance because it's a just general concept that there's a fruitfulness of God and God is going to provide for you if you work with Him and if you seek after Him. So reflecting back on each of these seeds, the seeds that got snatched by the birds, the seeds that sprouted and then they withered and died, the seeds that got choked out by the thorns, and then the seeds that actually produced something because they were actually on good soil. Each one of those are people. Each one of them hear the word. Each of those people go to a church on a Sunday and they hear the word. And each of them respond in their own way. But they may not understand it. They may not seek after God. They may not be working toward Him. And so, reading this, it happened for me, and I'm kind of curious, and I kind of assume for you guys that as I'm reading this, you were thinking in your head, maybe, which one of these seeds am I? Which of these am I fitting into? Have I heard the word and just ignored it because it was too frustrating or too confusing? Had I focused on God and really rooted in Him, but then the moment things get hard, I care more about the things around me than the things that I can't even see? Or, do we give into our own temptations? Do we give into what the world says that we want because we're not sure that God can give us that? Or do we actually land on good soil? Do we fight past everything else and pursue God and stay with Him through everything? And so that's what I want to leave you with. That is the one phrase that if I want you to take anything away from this, that is what I want you to think about. Which seed are you? Are you going to ignore it? Are you going to accept it? Are you going to fake accept it and just give up when things get tough? Are you going to get choked out by the things that don't really matter and that aren't going to give you life in the end? So, I just want to leave you with that. Which seed are you? Good job. Hey.